Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the profile of yours truly. More than you ever wanted to know about Rodney McG. I decided to do this video after there seemed to be some interest from the followers and from a few suggestions for two reasons. One is wondering a little bit more about my background, and two, something that I really think actually turned out to be a good idea, not just an excuse to talk about myself. There is a lot of advice given out on guitar and bass and music YouTube channels and whatnot, and a lot of times it's from people who maybe if you knew their qualifications or their background, you might not take the advice quite as seriously. Advice on touring from people who've never made it out of their basement, or things like that. Not that they can't be given good information, you never know, but sometimes, it's a little better to know if somebody's actually had a hand in what they're advising you about. So, I figured that would be two good reasons to do this, and maybe it's of some interest to you. Let's get started. I started playing bass when I was 14 years old, and pretty quickly got a serious interest in it. I started taking it pretty seriously right away, and was strong enough in it and obsessed enough that 6 months after I had started playing, I was starting to give lessons to the guy who introduced me to bass. So I was maybe a little obsessive. I was also really interested just in the instrument and how it functioned, and the first day I got a bass, my mother came in horrified to see that I had disassembled it and put it all over the bed because I just had to know how it worked. So that'll come in later with some things about maybe my advice on gear and things like that. But I joined a band, I guess, about when I was 16. Didn't last too long. It was, one of the first amateur attempts. But when I was 17, I got hired by a band that was with members all older than I was, and were already touring and already had a name for themselves. I was still in high school. Lucky enough, I had gotten into school early, and I was graduating a year early at 17, and they took some time off the summer tour to wait for me to graduate so I could go on the road with them. This was the first of my big trials by fire. So this is one of the places where when I talk about things that work on the stage and what's practical and what's not practical, or advice about touring, or especially about ear training and demanding more of yourself, this is kind of where I'm coming from in my experience on this. Like I said, I had a professional band that was already ready to tour when I had never played a live show before, waiting on me to graduate. Along with having to study for finals and trying to make sure I actually did graduate, I was given the fantastic task of a list of 53 songs that I had to be able to pull off in 2.5 weeks. On stage, in front of an audience, never having played a show. A little bit of pressure, a little bit. But so when I talk a lot about songwriting or listening to other players or really developing your ear and sense of song structure so that you can jump in and play with people, I speak from the kind of experience of like being paratrooped into the jungles of Vietnam and having to perform. It was incredibly intimidating, but I'm eternally grateful for it. I just have absolutely no hesitation about going into just about any situation because, one, I'm way past any stage fright or any kind of fear. You're not going to throw anything at me that really bothers me after that experience at that age. And I really had to start to understand things like really listening to other players, knowing when changes were coming up, starting to follow song structure and know where chords were leading to. And it developed my ear in a really guerrilla way that I just wouldn't have gotten normally. And it also taught me a lot about endurance and what really works on stage, because the reason I had to learn so many songs was the band survived on the road. And that meant that we would play for hours every night. We would do 3 45 to 50-minute sets with a half-hour break in between. So it'd be 45 minutes on, half hour off, 45 minutes on, half hour off, 45 minutes on. And then if we weren't playing in town the next night, it meant loading the entire gear out after that level of exhaustion. And because we traveled with our own lights and PA, all that gear had to go too. So hard work, And, you know, when the rubber hits the road in a way like that, you find out what's a luxury for the practice room and what you can actually do surviving on the road. So that's kind of the background I come from when I give advice on that kind of thing. So I did that for a number of years, and when we slowed down being on the road and started talking seriously with bigger management, labels, things like that, I got a job working for a guitar company, Paul Reed Smith Guitars. I learned about how to build an instrument basically from the ground up, and I became the head of their stain department and worked on guitars for, you know, huge names, Alex Lifeson, Carlos Santana, Ted Nugent, even Jimmy Page. So a lot of important work was handed to me, and I know the standards that instruments should be built to and what goes into the making of one. I also learned a lot about, you know, woods and what's a myth and what's not. So guitar building and the actual framework of what goes into an instrument, I learned a lot about too. I was there for about 4.5 years. And like I said, the band had slowed down on touring, and we were dealing more in negotiating with labels and things at that time. And this is where I started getting a lot into the music business, dealing with entertainment lawyers, starting to be able to know what an actual label contract is, what points were, you know, all the different machinations that you just have no idea of until you get hit in the face with it. And hit you in the face it will. It's a tough thing to get punched with and try and swim through all that. And the reason going forward I'm not going to name specifically some of the projects and things is, one, I don't think it's, you know, necessary for the project and things other than projects that I'm still involved with. But I don't like name dropping a bunch of things, and I also don't like bringing up things from the past that let sleeping dogs lie. So I'm sure it'd be easy enough to find if you really wanted to. But, you know, I'll leave specific names and people out of it for the protection of this documentary. But so at the signing table, dealing with a label, most people would think, you know, getting offered a deal would be a great thing. Thankfully, my study in the music business kept me from doing it. And there was a certain point where I started realizing that I was becoming either one of the central figures or the lead songwriter in most of the bands and projects I was in. And the one that I started pushing forward to with a label, I was writing the majority of the music. And I had, in my next big changeover of life, really crystallizing moment that sounds like it would come out of a movie or one of those, you know, ridiculous documentaries or something. And I'm sure it wasn't engineered this way, but it did kind of make sense. I was dealing with my band, and we were dealing with a record company and, you know, talking about what was called a development deal at the time, where, you know, labels actually would work with you on getting the sound forward. And they were already talking about changing our sound, going with some current trends, that type of thing, which I knew meant I had to change my songwriting. And I wasn't interested in it. And sitting at the table during one of the more heated arguments, I realized I was sitting on one side of the table with our lawyer, and the rep for the label was sitting on the other side of the table with all my band members. And just that moment of clarity and going, this isn't for me. I'm the only one that sees how bad this deal is. And they just didn't want to hear from our lawyer, who kept saying, this is a bad deal. You're going to sign yourselves away. You're very likely going to get shelved and probably never get to put out the albums that you promised. They're just going to use you as a tax write-off if you don't change and start doing the music they want you to. So in one of my most impulsive moves, I took a leave from the table, said I had to go out for a while, I was going to get some lunch and think about some things. I went and destroyed the master tapes that we had done so far for the demos, because I knew that if I left them, they would take them and use them with my performances and my work on it. And that I just wasn't going to see that happen. And, you know, what am I going to do? Hire a lawyer, me by myself, to fight a major label or something? No, thank you. So I did that. I quit my job at Paul Reed Smith. I basically dropped everything and decided I was moving to Los Angeles and was going to go to Musicians Institute, take some time out, reformulate, and start fresh. So that would be the second part when I talk about music education and things. I attended the Bass Institute at Musicians Institute, graduated from there, was fairly well awarded at the end of the year. And I had actually been asked to stay on and teach before I graduated, so I was already starting to teach before the end of my term there. And I taught there for a while, and then when I wasn't teaching on regular staff, I still came back and did clinics and that type of thing. So I'm familiar with the education side of music, the drawbacks, the advantages, and, whether it's really worth it or not, and what it's like to learn music in a more academic environment. So following that, I did a few projects in and around Los Angeles, and I got a lot into stage management and doing sound work and live engineering and things like that. So I got to see the other side and became educated or schooled in, everything about live sound, the difference in between being behind the board and being on stage, the lack of communication or understanding between artists and sound men, and just the entire live environment more from the person putting on the show than the person being the performer. So that taught me a lot, and I got to work from local clubs all the way up to large stages. I did, a lot of things with some larger artists like The Cure or TLC at the time, an R&B band, some bands like that. And so I got to see how even live sound changed and works, in a smaller room versus a theater or a large hall and that kind of thing. So I learned a lot about really how different every one of those things are, how different that is from your practice room and why most of that isn't going to work. And then production and engineering, that your sound in the studio ain't the sound that goes on stage, even though you're trying to get the same sound. So that's kind of the direction I come from when I talk about live sound and give advice about how you might want to engineer live, as I've seen it from the other side, not just from extensive touring and being on stage. Now, after that, musically, I did a few projects in the LA area, and when I talk a lot about what makes a band happen and what really is going to make it fall apart, I know a lot about that too. I did a few projects. The last band I had before the band the project that I currently have and am looking at revisiting, Voice of Dissent, it originally came from a band that all the members seemed to just kind of go in different directions at one time. And there were a number of reasons for it. There was bad management, there were egos, there were things. I'm glad that it seems like everybody moved on, because there were really some fantastic players in there. Guys that moved on to bands like All Shall Perish, Like the Torch, White Wizard, a really good bunch of guys. But it was kind of my last project where I really was willing to see things from a someone doesn't have to be in charge point of view. And so when I talk about understanding your marketing, understanding that everybody has to be on board, and that you have to realize that there's going to be some people in the band who just aren't leaders. And they need to realize that too. And just how you have to look at it like a troop or a military in a way, and that not everybody can be a quarterback. And that goes to the business and why bad business decisions can take you down too. And if someone's not on board, it doesn't matter how great they are, how fantastic a person, how fantastic a player. If they're not on board, they're going to drag you down. So really high caliber players, good music, and it was torn down because of infighting and that kind of thing. Now, that leads me up to the current thing, where it was after that point that I decided that I wasn't going to really do music in a recorded format unless I could do everything myself, because I just couldn't put any more of my life into doing something that could fall apart. It just was going to suck the life out of me. So that's when I got really involved in two things. One is learning every instrument that I felt capable of learning. I started playing guitar a lot more. And I started getting really interested in learning how to learn, because I knew I had a lot of things I needed to cover, and I just wanted to kind of get into the idea that if I understood how to learn, that would cover me across multiple topics and pursuits. So I got really heavy into that, and psychology, and understanding how you learn and what the pitfalls are, and procrastination and all that, and really how to woodshed and get better at things faster. So I developed two things. I became a vocalist. I had sung off and on in projects and seemed to have an okay level of ability, but I really buckled down and trained. And after a certain point, I actually started training and teaching other people. I used to give especially a lot of lessons to the heavier guys on how to scream without hurting themselves, that kind of thing. And that was actually my main income for a while, was teaching people vocals. I used to work out of a studio in Sherman Oaks in California. And so that, combined with really sitting down with guitar again and trying to become good at it, and took everything I could from guys like Paul Gilbert and Danny Gill, who used to teach at Musicians Institute, and just everybody that I could get really expert advice on, and how to just micro-diagnose my playing so that I didn't have to spend 10 years getting my picking down and relearning this other instrument and applying it. I wanted to get the science of it together and just go nuts. So I basically put down my bass for about 2 months and just woodshedded guitar every day in really heavily focused practice. And I think I came out of it pretty well. I can play just about anything that I can think of, and I do all the parts on my album and any projects that I do, and you can see my demos and things. That's how I got there. So when I give you tips on learning or how to really woodshed or accomplish things, I'm coming from that angle too. My last project is called Voice of Dissent. You can hear the tracks on my YouTube page. Some of that's going to get relaunched again soon, and I'm going to be revisiting it and putting out some new music. But all the guitar tracks, all the vocals, and all the bass are from me. There's drums from a couple of really well-known metal guys who are kind enough to donate some tracks for the drums, and the rest of it is programmed by me. I also got really into trying to think and understand how a drummer does things and be able to program like I'm really behind a kit, and I think I got fairly decent at it. And then that also got me into the endpoints about recording, digital recording, and all the equipment involved in that. So I had to get up to speed with that fairly quickly too. So that's pretty much the skills that I feel I have the ability to speak on, and what I bring to the table, and kind of my history as well. As far as going forward, I'm opening a studio here, a private studio, but one that I'll be working out of. I do gear demos, as you can see. I do advice and a show on metal bass, and I do some guitar, and I'm also working with a couple equipment companies. So that's where things sit now. Some new Voice of Dissent music's going to be coming out soon, and that's the Reader's Digest version of the history of Rodney McG. So, got any questions, comments, things you'd like to say, more information on things? Hit me up below. Or was it just enough Rodney McG for today? I think maybe it was. But I appreciate everybody on the channel, genuinely. I hope this fills in some holes and gives you some understanding of where I'm coming from with things. And again, any more info or something, I'm always happy to talk. Drop it below. Or if you're one of my patrons, let's get on the Discord, and we'll be doing a live chat here soon to expand on it. Thanks so much for checking it out. Hope that fills it all in. I'll see you on the next one. Wait! Don't go! You never know. Moments like this are crucial. The next video you watch could change your life. And it might be this one. Or even this one. Are you willing to take that chance? I don't know. Check them out.